Welcome to my 202nd video on my work with OO gauge. I'm afraid this is going to be another story with a not very happy ending. I just don't seem to be having much luck with things lately. The subject here is a couple of models of 060 diesel shunters that I picked up, one Hornby Dublo 3-rail and the other Wrenn 2-rail. The two models have a great deal in common, being based on the same tooling. This will be seen in considerable detail as we go along. I was pleased to get these two models. I'd been trying to get a Wrenn diesel shunter for some time. I bought one quite a while ago on eBay, but then what I actually got delivered was a Lima shunter model, very different and quite inferior. The vendor said it was a mistake and refunded half my money, and there things rested until I saw this one listed recently. And about the same time I saw a Dublo 3-rail version listed also, so I bought both. Spoiler alert, the reason this story is not very happy is that ultimately I have never been able to get the Dublo 3-rail version running satisfactorily. Details later on. When I first unboxed these, I was pretty happy about the whole project, pleased to have obtained these rather difficult-to-find models, and looking forward to working with them. The Dublo shunter is particularly hard to find in 3-rail. It came out very late in Dublo days, announced in December 1960 in both 2-rail and 3-rail versions. Nowhere near as many of these were sold as earlier Dublo models such as the N2, and the majority of those that were sold were in the 2-rail version. I should probably have been cautious about buying this, and you should be cautious if you're thinking of buying one, as apparently these were known to have problems right from their introduction, with poor pulling power, overheating problems, and frequent armature failures. These problems are mentioned in Michael Foster's book on Hornby Dublo, around page 160, and my example has certainly lived up to this poor reputation. Here are the two models in their boxes. They're very much created from the same tooling and are identical in many respects, although Wrenn seem to have managed some improvements to the motor, especially the armature itself, and the Wrenn version generally has a reputation for running reliably. The Wrenn version that I bought was in black LMS livery. Strictly speaking, this is stretching a point a bit, since the tooling was definitely based on the BR Class 8 shunter, but the LMS did operate quite similar diesel and diesel-electric shunters going right back to the 1930s. More on this a bit later in this video. The Dublo version was, I believe, only ever sold in this BR green livery. My Dublo model came with its paperwork, which I'll show here. Here are the outside pages of the booklet. The track plan on the back is somewhat similar to the basis that I used for my 3-rail tabletop railway, with a reversing loop going across the middle, although obviously I've added various bits beyond that. Here's just some general info on powering your Dublo tracks, geared of course to the UK. More on powering and track assembly. More on track assembly and oiling points for this particular shunter chassis. Brush replacement for the shunter, and I ended up having those brushes out many times in my attempts to fix problems. And some general running hints and other info about dinky toys and things. I got both models onto my test tracks. Since I've been doing a lot of 3-rail work, I've added a 3-rail test track now. But this whole experience powerfully illustrated the fact that testing on a test track only goes so far. If a model won't run on the test track, then you pretty certainly need to fix it. But the fact that a model runs okay on the test track is certainly not a guarantee that all is well. Here you can see my test tracks, 2 2-rail and now a third for 3-rail, just straight tracks about 4 feet in length powered by an MRC controller. It's important to have buffers firmly fixed at the ends of the test tracks, as the last thing I want is models being tested pitching right off the end onto the floor. Dublo buffer stops mainly rely on their being screwed down in place to stop them moving. Screwing into the soft foam on which my test tracks are placed wouldn't achieve much, so I fitted lengths of 1/8-inch styrene strip under the ends of my 3-rail test track, with the end of the track and the buffer stop both screwed down firmly into that styrene strip. Both of the Shunter models ran okay on the test tracks, but in the case of the Dublo model this turned out to be rather a false positive. Although they both ran okay on the test track, neither model could exactly be said to run smoothly with low power, so I got them onto the bench for some basic cleaning and lubrication. Here's the Wrenn model in the servicing cradle. I cleaned the wheels and lubricated the axles, conrods and driving gear. Here's the Dublo model in the cradle. I gave it the same cleaning and lubrication attention. It seemed to run pretty well in the cradle after this. I tried the Dublo model briefly on my tabletop. It seemed to work okay. The Wrenn model I gave a fairly thorough running in on my main Hornby layout, monitoring it with the baby monitor. I wanted to get some rolling stock out to run with the Wrenn model. I bought this coke hopper wagon just recently. These coke hoppers were first used by the Appleby Iron Company and became a standard LMS design in the 1930s, so quite suitable for my pre-war LMS prototype. I have kits to allow me to build a couple more of these wagons, but this is the Hornby ready-to-run version. Here's the back of the Hornby box, not particularly informative really. And here's the end of the box showing the version that I bought. These wagons continued in use by British Railways, and Hornby also sell the model in various BR versions. It's a fairly pricey model for a simple 4-wheeled wagon. The RRP is about £30, and I bought this new locally, paying about the equivalent to that in Canadian dollars. Here is the wagon out of the box. Certainly quite nicely done, but I still think £30 is a bit steep. Here's the bottom of the wagon. The wheelbase is shorter than you might expect. And here's the interior with a fair bit of detail. I coupled that wagon up behind the Wrenn Shunter with the 2 LMS bulk grain hoppers that I got recently and an LMS brake van. Meanwhile, the Dublo 3-rail version appeared to be running okay, famous last words. In other words, if you ever assume something is okay, it probably won't be. Still, I thought that all was okay, so I went ahead with rebadging the model as an LMS engine, as I don't run British Railways at all. I run just pre-war LMS. The body is taken off simply by removing the large screw on top, which Hornby didn't bother to paint. Of course, I don't think they did, unless the paint's just come off. And there's the chassis out of the body, something with which I have become only too familiar over the last week. I masked the ends of the body to try to preserve the paintwork on the buffer beams. My model was of the earliest Dublo type for this shunter, with single continuous conrods on each side. Apparently this arrangement contributed to the model's running problems, and the versions manufactured a bit later had separate rods between each pair of wheels, so basically 2 rods on each side with a join in the middle. So the 2 rods were both joined to the centre wheel. For my LMS version, I didn't want red connecting rods, because I don't think the LMS ever did that, so I worked to remove the paint using methyl hydrate on cotton buds. Methyl hydrate won't strip paint very quickly, and you can use it to remove badges, numbers, etc. without removing the underlying paint, if you're careful. But in this case I wanted to remove the paint right down to the bare metal, so I used a lot of cotton buds soaked in methyl hydrate. I didn't bother to try to remove the paint from the inside of the rods, but I tried to get as much as possible off the outside. Here's the other side after my efforts. Meanwhile, I spray painted the plastic body black. I removed my masking tape from the buffer beams. Unfortunately, quite a bit of the red paint on the buffer beams came off when I removed the tape. Normally paint won't come off when you remove masking tape, but then I think maybe this paint wasn't stuck on too well. So I had to touch up the red of the buffer beams, which I did. I also painted the body retaining screw black. The Wrenn version came with this already done. For my LMS conversion, I didn't really want the large ladders on the front of the model. These were metal parts held in place by tabs that protruded through slots to the inside of the plastic body and folded over. I straightened these tabs out so that they could be pulled through to the outside. It was then possible to pull the tabs out from their slots in the body so that the ladder parts could be removed. Here are both ladders after removal. They could easily be refitted should that be wanted. I considered how I should mark the model as an LMS engine, consulting pictures in P. Rowledge's book Engines of the LMS. These two pictures show post-war LMS diesel-electric engines. These would be closest to the BR Class 8, and the Wrenn model was numbered 7124, basically as one of these. But I modelled pre-war LMS operations, and there were quite a few diesel and diesel-electric shunters in use by the LMS in the 1930s. Here are pictures of a selection from Rowledge's book. I felt that the one at bottom right seemed about my best choice. At least its wheels and conrods are about the same. The body is rather different, but still it seemed about the best bet. This engine was built by English Electric in 1934 and initially leased to the LMS until being taken into regular LMS stock in 1936. I got out a sheet of HMRS press-fix decals for yellow LMS coach and loco markings. I started by placing LMS letters on the sides of the body. I placed the numbers sort of below and in front of the cab. They couldn't be placed exactly as on the real 7079 as the body was different. I also got mixed up and put 7029 rather than 7079. Still, I wasn't too unhappy with my approximation. I sprayed the body with a coat of matte acrylic fixative before remounting it to dull the finish a bit and to protect the decals. I put the body back on the chassis. Now I was ready to run this loco on my 3-rail tabletop, and I thought that I was more or less finished. I did re-lubricate before putting the model onto the tracks, as my paint removal efforts had taken off the original lubrication. Unfortunately, when I actually tried to run this model on my 3-rail tracks, it would only run briefly before slowing down and grinding to a halt. And so began days of trying to fix that problem. The Ringfield motor is essentially integrated right into the chassis. The lower motor casing is just part of the chassis itself. Here I've removed the top of the motor casing. The armature is still in place, and you can see the ring magnet. The brushes and the little coil springs that retain them are at the back. I cleaned the commutator with electric contact cleaner. I also checked and oiled the motor bearings. When I removed the magnet, I forgot to mark it, so when I put it back I got it the wrong way round and the model ran backwards when the controller was set to forwards. The magnet is quite symmetrical and can be fitted either way up and either way round. I tested the chassis on the rolling road. Since this was a 3-rail model, I initially applied power just by clipping contacts directly to the brush connectors. Then I tried by clipping one contact to the center rail pickup of the model and the other contact to one of the tracks. The model basically seemed to work fine like this, but whenever I tried it on the actual tracks, it ground to a halt after a short amount of running. I took the motor parts out entirely, and also the center rail pickup assembly, and thoroughly cleaned out the chassis with electric contact cleaner. I did this to try to be sure to eliminate all resistance to running in the wheels and axles. Having thoroughly sprayed everything out, I let the chassis dry and then re-lubricated it before reassembling the motor. Whilst I was doing all this, the connector for the center rail contact broke off its wire, so I soldered it back on again. All of that messing around made the model run better in the sense that it ran quieter and with less power, but it still ground to a halt after a while, although it was a slightly longer while before it ground to a halt now. It seemed that as soon as the model warmed up or overheated, it stopped working. Here you can see both the Dublo and Wrenn models disassembled. I've marked the magnets now with black marker on the top at the back so that I can be sure of putting them back correctly. You can see here how similar the Dublo and Wrenn models are. The main difference is that the wheels of the Wrenn model are insulated from the axles on one side, and then there are pickups for that side to the wheels, connected by a wire passing through the same hole in the chassis that's used for mounting the centre rail pickup assembly. Here are the two armatures, Dublo at left, Wrenn at right. I think this is mainly where Wrenn improved the design. I tried fitting the Wrenn armature to the Dublo model because I was more interested in having a 3-rail version than a 2-rail version, but it wouldn't work. The motor simply didn't turn on the 3-rail version when the Wrenn armature was fitted to it, so there must be something a little different in the dimensions or whatever. Here's the top of the Wrenn chassis. The chassis block itself is precisely the same as the Dublo one so far as I can see, including everything required to fit the centre rail pickup. The black wire comes through the hole used for the centre rail pickup fitting and goes round to connect through the yellow resistor to the brush fitting. Here's the pickup assembly on the bottom of the Wrenn model. This seems to be exactly the same arrangement as was used for the Dublo 2-rail version. The part number on the pickup plate is even the same as the Dublo 2-rail version. With the screws retaining that pickup plate removed, it can be lifted and you can see the actual pickups between two layers of plastic. The wire from those pickups goes round the back of the top motor housing and is connected to the yellow resistor. And the yellow resistor is connected to the brush holder. The other brush holder is just fitted directly in connection with the chassis, and power from the other non-insulated wheels goes through the chassis itself to that brush. On the other hand, here is the Dublo chassis. The connector on the end of the black wire is fastened by the nut to the end of the bar coming from the centre rail pickup, and the fibreboard piece underneath insulates that connection and also keeps the rod centred in the oversized hole so it doesn't short to the chassis. And then, similarly to the Wrenn version, that black wire is connected to one brush holder and the other brush holder is connected directly to the chassis, which in this case is connected to the wheels on both sides since neither side is insulated. I removed the centre rail pickup assembly again, holding it together with a clamp, and put it aside. I wondered what would happen if I removed the screws at the front and back of the side of the chassis. I was sort of hoping that it would be possible to detach the bottom of the chassis together with the axles and wheels. No such luck, unfortunately. Those screws just hold in place a sort of plastic skirting on the outside of the wheels. The chassis is all one solid block and the axles go right through it, so the only way to get the wheels off would be to pull them off the axles. I really didn't want to do that as I wasn't confident that it would be possible to refit the wheels properly. I would have liked to have removed the wheels, as if I could have swapped over the wheels, I could have fitted the centre rail pickup to the Wrenn chassis and the side pickup to the Dublo chassis and tried to run them the other way round, with the Wrenn chassis running 3-rail and the Dublo chassis running 2-rail. If nothing else, that would probably have given me an actual working 3-rail version, as the Wrenn motor and chassis were running okay. But I didn't do this as I didn't want to pull the wheels. So at the moment I have a 2-rail Wrenn version that basically runs okay, although it could perhaps use a bit more servicing, as I've been focusing most of my servicing efforts on trying to get the Dublo version to work. And I have a Dublo 3-rail version that will only run briefly before grinding to a halt. I found a service in the UK that will rewind these armatures for you for £20 if you send them your armature with return postage, so I might possibly try that. I suppose I could even try to rewind the Dublo armature myself. I've also, according to my normal policy of throwing good money after bad, bought a Dublo 2-rail version of this diesel shunter. It only cost me about half what I paid for the rarer 3-rail version, which is fairly typical of the prices they go for. It was sold as a good runner, but I take that with something of a pinch of salt, so was my 3-rail version. I guess I'll wait until that Dublo 2-rail version gets here, and then I'll have another go at seeing what I can do. Meantime, I'm rather frustrated, since my success rate has not been at all good recently. Been having health problems too, and winter has arrived, so it's all a bit discouraging. I'll finish with a quick running demonstration of these two models as I've got them at this point. So, this is my Dublo 3-rail diesel shunter, and this one has proved a bit of a disaster. Well, it's certainly taken a lot of work, and we've still not really got anywhere with it. I thought when I finished doing the repaint and re-decalling of this one, I'd finished with it because it had run okay on the test track going backwards and forwards, but it proved to be more of a trouble. It will, I think, run okay when we start it. It usually does. Sorry, there's some clocks chiming a half hour here, so let's give it a little power. Zoom out a bit more. There we go. Give it about 50% power. Maybe a little more than 50. Give it 55. This is the problem. It runs quite well when it's cold, when it starts. Didn't run this well when I started with it. It died before it got it, after it got around about one circuit when I started with it. But I've done a lot of work on it, cleaning things, polishing things. But this is what happens basically after a little bit of running. It slows down, it stops dead. Famous last words, it's not quite stopped dead, it's just slowing down, but and then when it stops dead, the light on the controller goes out. Because it's apparently, well, I don't know, it's created an overload or a short circuit. And that's it, that's what it does. It runs for a lot longer before it dies now because I've made it a lot freer. I've completely cleaned up the whole chassis and the motor and polished everything and lubed it. But I can't stop it doing this. I don't quite know why it's doing it. I'm assuming probably some sort of fundamental problem with the armature, but I'm not 100% sure. Now this is the Wrenn version. And it's very much the same model, although of course made geared for 2-rail running. But it uses very much the same kind of motor and chassis and body. This runs, and I hope it doesn't make a liar of me, but it's run so far, it actually went through a running in routine and everything. It actually doesn't run quite as well as the other because I haven't spent quite so much time cleaning and polishing and lubing things. I haven't done a lot of work really on this. I played around. I tried the armature from this one and the other one to see if it would work, but I couldn't get the other one to work with the armature from this one in it. They look very similar, but there must be I think maybe the main, the main rod, the main axis of the armature is maybe a little bit bigger on this one, so it doesn't run in the bearings of the other one. I'm not sure exactly, but anyway. Let's see if we can get this to go. It's got the coke hopper behind it and the 2 grain hoppers from a couple of weeks ago. So it does need a fair bit of power. I really should service this one thoroughly. But I've been struggling so much to get the other one to work, I haven't got round to servicing this one thoroughly. I spent hours and hours and hours mucking around servicing the other one, trying to persuade it to work. It's a sort of case of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, I guess. Because this one basically worked, albeit it's using rather a lot of power. I mean, that's about 75% power. That's a bit slow. I've just turned it down at 70% power, but still that's a bit slow for 70% power. Although, mind you, these older Wrenn locos do tend to take a bit more power than the modern locos. But he's basically running, and he's basically run since I got him, so I haven't spent lots of time. I'm going to stop him when he comes round this time. I haven't spent lots of time on servicing him, unlike the other one. So let's just pull the back of the train off the westwards off the level crossing if we can. So there you go. That's the Wrenn one. Very, very similar to the Hornby one, but I think Wrenn made a few tweaks to the design, which made it a bit less prone to overheating and messing itself up compared to the Hornby 3-rail ones.